The 7th Rapid Response Corps and adjacent units cleared Pokrovsk of Russian subversive groups and individual saboteurs. This was reported by the press service of the 7th Corps. Ukrainian military are working in the city and local residents are moving around. However, movement within the city is significantly limited, but it is possible to get to Pokrovsk, the paratroopers said. Ukrainian troops, using infantry assault tactics, are trying to infiltrate Ukrainian combat formations unnoticed, taking advantage of bad weather, dawn, and dusk, when drones lose their effectiveness, and hiding behind thermal insulation capes. However, unlike classical sabotage and reconnaissance groups, whose purpose was to conduct actual sabotage operations, these infantry groups amass in rear areas in order to conduct assault operations at a certain moment. Such groups are usually supported by drones. However, this tactic is extremely dangerous for the direct perpetrators, as the vast majority of them are killed on the approach to Ukrainian positions. For example, according to deep state community analysts, the Russians brought about 30 saboteurs to Pokrovsk on July 19th. However, at first there were 3 groups of 50 soldiers each. The sabotage group set off from Selidov to Pokrovsk in early July. The entire journey took them 14 days. It took them 10 days to travel from the village of Pishchany to Zakistnakiv Ukraini Street on the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Thus, each day an enemy infantryman walked only 600 meters in the hope of not being detected. Communications, water, and food were provided by drone drops. However, despite such a complex operation, 120 out of 150 saboteurs died on the way. After that, the Ukrainian military in the city, including the units of the 25th Airborne Brigade and the 425th Skala Assault Regiment, began to hunt for the saboteurs. Most of the saboteurs were killed, some were captured. However, even the neutralization of such a relatively small number of saboteurs took almost a month for the Defense Forces units. The aftermath of the gunpowder explosion at the Elastic plant in Russia's Ryazan region. Footage from locals show massive damage, with nothing left of the workshop where the blast occurred. Preliminary reports cite a safety violation as the cause, possibly triggered by detonation of ammunition. 5 people were killed and at least 100 injured. Russia's police state is running out of police. Low salaries and poor working conditions have prompted so many to leave for better-paid army or war industry jobs that basic police services are falling apart and educational requirements for new recruits are being eliminated. Russia's law enforcement agencies, which come under the Interior Ministry, have been experiencing an increasingly severe manpower crisis. In some regions, the police are as much as 50% under strength. Many Russian war bloggers have been discussing the reasons for the crisis. This has been prompted by a report from the Uralmash Telegram channel, which has aroused outrage in Russia. Yekaterinburg police failed to detain an alleged fraudster who was accused of stealing 1 million rubles, $12,500, because no police were available to make an arrest. The police employee who was supposed to participate in the arrest was on leave, and there were simply no others. According to the duty officer, out of 16 people in their criminal investigation department, only 1 remained. Most of their colleagues quit due to low wages and poor conditions. This problem also exists in other Yekaterinburg departments. Sometimes police officers have to work in areas other than their own, or ignore calls because there is no one to go out to them. According to the latest official data, in the Sverdlovsk region, the shortage of patrol and post officers is 88%. In the Criminal Investigation Department, 62%. Sergei Kolyashnikov worries that the virtual disappearance of the police risks a collapse of the state. If there is only 1 available out of 16, the system doesn't work. No options. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about valves in an engine or the Ministry of Internal Affairs. All that's left is a fire alarm mode, a reaction to resonance with the last of our strength. Let me remind you of my recent post. The first thing that needs to be done to collapse a state from within is to deprive it of protection, of the law enforcement system. Kirill Fedorov concludes that there is no police, it's over, and asks, According to the latest data, the shortage of the Ministry of Internal Affairs is more than 170,000 people. Why is this happening? And who, except for the ideological ones, will go to a deliberately low-paid job while having more attractive options? And this applies not only to police officers. Why would anyone become a doctor, engineer, teacher, when you can become a courier for fun and sometimes earn several times more? We can also recall the situation with the allowances of military personnel, air defense personnel, technicians and others, and the Russian Guard, who do not take part in hostilities. And from here, another problem follows, where instead of ordinary people, their own, from organized criminal groups called ethnic diasporas, go to the police. And only after this do we learn about the incredible, humane decisions of our best and fairest court. Two majors puts the blame on burdensome and arbitrary bureaucracy and the poor management that the Russian security forces have to endure. He says this will lead to a huge exodus after wartime stop-loss orders are lifted. We report that as soon as the provisions of the Supreme Decree limiting dismissals from the troops, and most importantly, agencies, where employees are military personnel, are cancelled, a huge number of people will leave the service. They sit for years without a contract. The reasons are not only financial. The reason is bureaucracy, tyranny, discrediting awards due to awarding ass-kissers, and most importantly, often the substitution of the real work of a real security officer with paper crap from reports, slides, reporting forms, and endless meetings. The problem, in our opinion, is blurred, and those same beautiful reports go to the top, the very top. Ivan Alexandrovich Otrakovsky explains why people want to leave the police. Salaries are meager, housing conditions are poor, there is a stick system, crazy overtime, orders from bosses and bureaucrats above about which cases to promote, which to let slide. Instead of catching criminals, most of them just run after migrants to check the legality of their stay. The current system is brutal, and it affects everyone except the ruling oligarchic octopus. Andrei Medvedev comments, "Understaffing is not so noticeable in large cities or the central apparatus. Understaffing is compensated to some extent by the use of modern technologies. Billing, a system of surveillance cameras. But these are all patches on Trishkin's coat, i.e., a pauper's ragged garment that is constantly being patched. No camera can replace a live detective, a patrol police officer, a district police officer. They are trying to solve this situation at the regional level. They pay extra to patrol service employees, 10 to 15,000. But this is, of course, not serious. Still less than a scooter courier, and not a government approach. However, here is what is happening at the government level. With a huge number of vacancies, let me remind you the shortfall is 18%, the ministry is not allowed to redistribute the savings in the wage fund to stimulate current employees. While the Russian police can be effective if they are well-resourced, it comes at the cost of overworking of employees, working on sheer enthusiasm, low qualification of citizens applying for jobs. Each operative writes a ton of useless papers a year. Military informant says that salaries are the key problem. Everything else is rather secondary. As actual practice shows, for good money, people are not against signing up even for the stormtroopers in the special military operation, where the chance of dying or getting injured is much higher than serving as a police officer. Therefore, as soon as the system of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and related security agencies starts paying decent salaries, there will immediately be a flow of people wishing to join and competition between them, which means the opportunity to select more qualified employees for the system. And for decent money, people will be ready to work even with senseless bureaucracy and tyranny, just as they are ready to fight with these same vices. Roman Alekhine disagrees, saying that as bad as the salaries are, the working environment is worse. Service to the motherland has turned into an extreme degree of servility to superiors. Everyone says that they are tired because more and more the management system is falling into loyalty and not into professionalism, and at the same time, there is more and more bureaucracy against the background of complete defenselessness of the system worker himself, as well as the constant discrediting of the profession in the eyes of others. Trump, now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done.
And we agreed on a lot of points. I mean, a lot of points were agreed on. But there's not that much. There's, one or two pretty significant items, but I think they can be reached. Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done. And I would also say the European nations, they have to get involved a little bit. But it's up to President Zelensky. I think we are, and if they'd like, I'll be at that next meeting. They're going to set up a meeting now between President Zelensky and President Putin. And myself, I guess, I didn't ask you about it. Not that I want to be there, but I want to make sure it gets done. And we have a pretty good chance of getting it done.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Rescues every day. We had a guy last week at 6 rescues in 6 days. He's doing the job every day.